Welcome back, everyone. I'm super excited that you tuned in, and I have some exciting news as well. The podcast is now available on all your favorite listening platforms, now including more well-known ones such as Apple, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcast, along with many more. Just pick your favorite one, choose it, and it'll be on there. If you like the show, would you do me a solid favor and give me a 5-star review on Apple or some of the larger known platforms and subscribe? This will help tremendously getting the show out to more people that might not know about it yet. I'm really excited about this episode. There's going to be some fun stuff that we're going to step back and talk about. I'm really excited. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started. Alright, let's jump into it. This is not going to be the prototypical episode in the sense that it's not going to follow the structure of the last 4 episodes. I want this podcast to be sort of a journey. I want us to grow together as Braves fans as well as baseball fans in general. With this happening, I realized that I have been touching on some quote-unquote advanced stats. WAR, RTAT, and UBR are some we talked about in earlier episodes. But I want this podcast to be fun for everyone involved, and I realize maybe there are some listeners that are just jumping into the realm of stats and analytics. I want to take this episode and take a step back and explain at a basic level what can be considered quote-unquote standard stats. Don't worry, guys and gals that already know these stats. I'm going to explain things about them you may not know already, such as what stats really matter, why they matter, or why they do not matter. There are a lot of stats out there that are very deceiving on how much value the player actually brings based on these stats. On the flip side, there are some that are underrated in a sense that they are not given the attention they should. Fortunately, it appears that announcers and fans alike are starting to come around to this. I want to help you get a head start. Let's start with offense. We will begin with plate appearances and at-bats. It is important to know the difference because they affect things like batting average and on-base percentage differently. A plate appearance is literally every time a batter comes up to the plate or appears. Pretty simple, right? At-bats are a little more tricky. It is great that there is a difference, though, because it helps players not get negative effects for things that were actually positive, like sacrifice flies, for example. Let me explain. It is only considered an at-bat if a batter strikes out, reaches on an error, reaches on a fielder's choice, or gets a hit. If you don't know what fielder's choice is, that is when a player hits the ball and someone else gets out instead of them because the fielder chooses to go that route instead. For example, if you were to hit a grounder, the guy throws the ball to second, getting the guy running from first to second out instead of you, and you still got on base. It is not considered an at-bat if a player is walked, hits a sacrifice, which is when they hit the ball and they get out, but a positive effect happens like a runner tagging and scoring. And lastly, it does not count as an at-bat if a player gets hit by a pitch. Alright, a hit. This is hopefully the most obvious one. The batter hits the ball and reaches base safely. A single is when they get to first, double when they get to second, triple to third. Home run is over the fence or inside the park where they make it all the way around to home plate. The caveat here is that it cannot be due to an error or a fielder's choice. Typically, a number 1 or number 2 hole guy will lead the league in hits because they have the most plate appearances. For example, last year for the Braves, Ozzie Albies hit number 2, and he had the most hits out of anyone in the league. Also, if you do not know, an error is when the fielder makes a mistake like botching the grounder or fly ball, making a bad throw, and so on. A run. Hopefully you know what this is, but it's when a runner scores, Typically, the higher you are in the order, the more runs you score. While a high number of runs is obviously good, this is not 100% reliant on the player's skill themselves. There are things that factor in, like how high they are in the batting order and who's hitting behind them. Typically, you'll see, again, a number 1 or number 2 hitter on a good team lead the league. Hence why it is reliant on factors that are not just the batter himself. So, if you're looking at runs scored, it's really more of a team stat rather than just the player himself. Obviously, like I said, the player needs to get on base, needs to be in position to score. So yeah, the player has to be good to get there, but it's not like a single player stat. It's a combination of player and team. RBI, or runs batted in. This is when a batter knocks in another runner to score. The batter can still get an RBI if they do not hit safely. A sac bunt, a grounder that results in them getting out, but the runner's a score, or a sacrifice fly. The caveat here is if they hit into a double play, it does not count as an RBI. To me, personally, I think that is dumb because the runner still scores and you batted them in, but oh well. I guess they want to take away positives from something so negative as hitting into a double play. A batter does not receive an RBI on a play where the runner scores due to an error. On a side note, if the bases are loaded and the batter walks, gets hit by a pitch, either one of those, that is considered an RBI. So if the bases are loaded, you get 4 balls, you walk to first, the guy walks home, that's still an RBI. Bases are loaded, you get hit by a pitch, you get an automatic walk to first base because you got pegged. That also counts as an RBI, even though you didn't technically hit the ball. RBIs, to me, are actually the most overrated offensive stat. Yes, a player has to produce to get them, just like runs, but they are not an indicator of the player's skill or output level individually. It is more indicative of the team around him. You could put Hank Aaron batting third on the worst team in the league, and he would not get as many RBIs as he would if he was on a good team. Put him on a good team, and he would probably lead the league. See what I mean? It's more about situation, lineup placement, and the team around you than anything else. Like I said, obviously, you have to, not get into a situation to where your head game's messing with you, where you get the yips when you bat fourth with the bases loaded. I mean, there's the mental aspect of it and stuff like that, and being clutch. I mean, that is a real thing, but in a true sense, like I said, it's more about situation, lineup placement, and the team around you than anything else. A walk. When you get 4 balls before you get 3 strikes, and you get a free pass to first. If you're a baseball fan, I sure hope you knew that. There aren't even any caveats on that one. Strikeout, the opposite of a walk. 3 strikes and you're out. I'm sure even as a non-baseball fan knows that. But let's just list the stats, right? I mean, why not? I'm praying you knew that. If not, you came to the right place today. Before we move on, I want to talk about the term /line. You will hear announcers, authors, other fans, podcasters say that they're talking about batting average, on base percentage, and slugging percentage. So if you see a /line that says .250 / .350 / .450, for example, that means they have a 250 batting average, a 350 on base percentage, and a 450 slugging. It will always be in that order. So, average. This is the most simple of the three. It is the percentage of times a player will get a hit for when they go up to bat. If you see like 300, that means 3 out of 10 times. This stat is also the least indicative of value of the three as well. A lot of old school people use average as an indicator. It is a part of the equation, but it's certainly not the end-all be-all. Typically, if you see a guy hit 300, though, he is considered to have a good year. But if he never walks and only hits singles, is that really that valuable? Just average alone does not tell a good enough story on how well a player actually did. On base percentage, or you might see OBP. This is the stat you should be looking at to determine how much the player gets on base. It includes hits, walks, and hit by pitch. From a mathematical standpoint, it is hits plus walks plus hit by pitch divided by total number of at-bats. Walks, hit by pitch, and sacrifice flies. I will say that again. From a mathematical standpoint, it is hits plus walks plus hit by pitch divided by total number of at-bats, walks, hit by pitch, and sacrifice flies. And an easier way to put it, if a player has an OBP of .400, that means that they get on base 40% of the time. Let's look at a scenario here. Tim Anderson has a batting average of .335. Alright, from here on out, I'm not going to say the dot, you get what I'm saying, to lead the league last year. But his on-base percentage was only 22 points higher, at .357. In 2014, Jose Bautista only had a batting average of .286, but had an OBP of .403. If you were to look at average alone, you would think Anderson got on base at a higher rate, but in reality, Bautista had him by a full 5% more. Let's take this even further with slugging percentage. Slugging is total bases divided by at-bats. Total bases meaning a single would equal 1, a double 2, triple 3, and home run 4. As an example, if you had 4 at-bats and hit a single, which equals 1, popped out, which equals 0 when you get out, homered, which equals 4, and lined out, which equals 0, you would add all those together, then divide by 4 because of 4 at-bats. So 1 plus 0 plus 4 plus 0 equals 5. Math genius over here. Divide that by 4 and you get your slugging percentage of 1.25. That was just easy math. In reality, the top 20 in slugging last year ranged from .550 to 671, who was Christian Yelich, by the way. So, you're not going to see a slugging percentage of 1.25. I was just giving easy math there for you guys. Like I said, Christian Yelich led all of majors last year with a .671. Coincidence that he was in the conversation for MVP? I think not. He would have won it if he did not get hurt, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, Cody Bellinger definitely deserved the award, though. I'm so glad the voters are starting to get it right. You will hear the term OPS, which is on base plus slugging. So if a player had a 400 OBP and a 600 slugging, that would put them at 1.000 or 1,000 would be what we'd call it. To me, OPS is the first thing I look at to see the batter's value without doing a deep dive into the stats. It is definitely not everything. It does not factor in things that advanced stats factor in, like what park they play in, how lucky they actually got. But from a standard stats perspective, it is a good indicator. If a player has a OPS north of 1,000 for the entire year and they played enough games to qualify, they should be in the top 5 MVP voting almost every time, even first basemen with their lack of defense. Sorry, Freddie, it's just the truth. Let's take a break and then we will get into pitching stats. Alright, welcome back. Let's jump into pitching stats. And again, these are standard stats. They're not the advanced stats. They're pretty straightforward. Let's start with ERA, which stands for Earned Run Average. This is how many runs the pitcher averages per 9 innings. For example, if a pitcher were to pitch a complete game of 9 innings and give up 4 runs, his ERA would be 4. For those of you who know about this stat already, I know this is an unlikely scenario. I'm just giving easy math here. You won't see a guy pitch 9 innings if he's given up 4 runs. Unless for some reason he's on inning 9 and someone hits a grand slam off of him, which probably wouldn't happen anyways. But anyways, I'll also like to note that there is some luck or lack thereof involved when you look at ERA, and that's why you can't just look at ERA itself. Generally speaking, if you see a starter floating an ERA around 3.00, he is having a good year though. There are some things to consider here, though. Things come into play like you have a good or bad defense behind you. If you have a really bad defense, odds are you're going to give up more runs. Even though it's not technically your fault, the defensive players might have a really bad range, and so the ball might get past them and it won't count as an error on them, and you'll still get charged with runs. If you're pitching in a pitcher or hitter-friendly park, things like that will also factor into your ERA, because if you pitch in a pitcher-friendly park, odds are you're going to have a lower ERA because batters aren't going to be hitting as many home runs. Or if you're in a hitters-friendly park, they're going to be hitting more bombs off you. However, I would like to say that ERA itself is a much better indicator of a pitcher's performance than the next stats we're about to talk about. This stat, in my opinion, is literally the most overrated and overused stat in all of baseball. The win-loss record of pitchers, especially starters. Alright, let's dig into it. A win is recorded when a pitcher is pitching when a team takes their final lead of the game. For example, if a pitcher is pitching, his own team scores a run that puts them in the lead, the game ends and that lead is preserved, that pitcher gets the win. There is a caveat for starters, okay? They need to pitch at least 5 innings. A loss is the opposite. The pitcher that is pitching when the other team takes their final lead of the game. 5 innings do not need to be pitched for the starter here to get the loss. Wow, where to begin with losses and how they aren't truly indicative of a pitcher's effectiveness. First, if you remember how I explained wins, it is dependent on if your team scores more runs and keep their lead while you're pitching. You could give up 1 run in 9 innings, but if your team does not score, you will get the loss. You could pitch 7 innings, only give up 1 run, but if your team only scores 1 run while you're pitching, you'll get a no decision. While yes, you do have to keep your team in games to get the win, it is more of a team stat than a starting pitcher stat. It will really pitcher stat in general, but especially for starters. If you look at the history of the sport, especially since we started using a 4-man rotations back in the day, it is typically the pitchers on teams with top offenses that have the most wins. Let's look at some examples of how pitchers had a great season but did not have good records. Tim Lincecum had a year in 2011 where he pitched to a 13-win, 14-loss record but had an ERA of 2.74 in 33 starts. Remember how we talked about ERA plus in the past? He had an ERA plus of 127 plus, putting him at 27% better than league average. He had an even better actual ERA, yet a losing record. The reason being is because he had a bad offense behind him, a bullpen that would fall apart at times, resulting in not holding on to the lead for him to get a win, and bad luck. Here are some more. Jacob deGrom, you might have heard of him, has had a few bummer years. He led the league in ERA with a microscopic 1.70. Guys, this low of an ERA is straight unheard of for a starter. Yet he barely had a winning record of 10-9. He also had a year in 2016 where he had an ERA of 3.04, pitching 32% better than league average, and still had a losing record of 7-8. King Felix, who's now on the Braves, had a year in 2010 for the Mariners where he led the league in ERA at 2.27, yet only had 1 more win than loss with a 13-12 record. He also led the league with 34 starts. That's 9 no decisions where either his offense or bullpen let him down. He was 74% better than the average starter that year and only had 1 win more than losses. Jeff Samardzija in 2014 had a terrible record of 7-13, yet had an amazing ERA of 2.99 while starting 33 games. He was 25% better than the average starter based on ERA+, yet his record would not tell you that. If you just looked at the record, you would think he had a bad year. Here is the biggest kicker. Pat Dobson pitched 2,120 career innings over 11 years with an outcome of a 3.54 ERA. Not elite, but great. He was 17% better than the league average over an entire 11-year career, yet had a losing record of 122 and 129. On the flip side, you can look at pitchers with great records who just had okay seasons. Last year, Wade Miley had a record of 14-6, but had an ERA of almost 4. Not terrible, but not nearly as good as his winning percentage would indicate. It was because he had a killer offense and a great bullpen behind him. In 2018, Rick Porcello had a 17-7 record with an ERA of 4.28 and was only 3% better than league average, yet had a 70% win ratio. What did he have in common with Wade Miley, you might ask? A great offense and a decent bullpen behind him. See a trend here? Pitchers with great offenses and good to great bullpens will end up getting more wins than if they played on a bad team, even if they pitched with the exact same on-field results from their pitching. There are many more examples, and I encourage you to look them up. It is fascinating, to say the least. Okay, rant over. Next, we have walks, or base by balls, which we already covered with batting stats, abbreviated as BB. We don't need to go much more into that. It's when a pitcher pitches 4 balls before he pitches 3 strikes, the batter gets a free pass to go to first base. Strikeouts. Okay, we know what this is, but one tidbit you may enjoy is if you look in a scorebook or a scoreboard, you may see a backwards letter K. Well, strikeout is designated by the letter K. If it is backwards, that means the pitcher struck the batter out looking, meaning they did not swing at the pitch that struck them out. A hit, okay, is when they give up a hit and all the other hitting stats that go along with hits, like home runs given up, singles given up, all of that, pretty straightforward. BF stands for batters faced, which is self-explanatory. No real caveats here. Balk. Okay, I want to talk about balks. This one may be possibly new to some baseball fans, because it does not happen very often. Especially at the major league level, this would really just be a mental lapse, in my opinion. It's more of like just a mental mess up. Balk is when a pitcher makes an illegal movement on the mound. There are certain movements that are not allowed in the league, that pitchers are not allowed to make, such as turning their shoulders towards first or not throwing the ball home once they make their movement towards home plate. This results in any base runners advancing 1 base. I will say this, some pitchers' windups and stretch moves, I personally, if I was an umpire, would definitely call it a balk, but hey, I'm not there, I'm not the one making the call. One that really sticks out to me is Johnny Cueto when he does that little wiggle thing. To me, that's a balk. In high school, that would be a balk. But I guess it'd be kind of equivalent to basketball, how normally in basketball, you take 2 or 3 steps and it's a travel, but in the NBA you can take 4 or 5 and before they say anything. It might be one of those things. I don't know. But in a general sense, that's what a balk is. All right, a hold. A hold is strictly a reliever stat. It is when the reliever comes into the game when their team is winning and does not finish the game. You're essentially the setup man, but you don't have to be designated as a setup man. The setup man typically gets this stat, gets the lion's share of the stat, but it's not limited to him. So basically, let's say you are winning by 1 run. A pitcher comes in. He does his job, doesn't allow any runs to happen, and then the closer comes in and gets the credit for the close. The guy in the middle, he gets the hold. Alright, so a save, that's what your closer goes after. A save is when a pitcher enters the game where a team is winning by 3 or fewer runs and completes the game to get the save. The caveat here is actually kind of interesting, is that there are 2 other ways to get a save. Entering the game with a tying run on the on-deck circle, at the plate, or on the bases, or pitch at least 3 innings and your team ends up winning. To be completely honest with you, I didn't know that last one till a little while ago. I did not know that was a thing, so I'm just being straight up with you guys. I didn't know that. Now we both know. The last standard stats for pitchers is a complete game. When I say stats, I'm gonna compile some of them together. Is a complete game, meaning that they pitch the entire game. A shutout, which means they pitched the entire game and did not give up a run. A no-hitter, which means they pitched the entire game but did not give up a hit. And then a perfect game, meaning they pitched the entire game without giving up a hit, walk, run, or hit by pitch. While we're on the subject, I realized I kind of might have missed something of a standard pitcher's stat that we didn't talk about. And that would be, you might see the term WHIP, W-H-I-P. That is walks plus hits per inning pitched. So you take the average, kind of like ERA with runs per 9 innings. You would do it per inning. So how many walks plus hits do you give up on average per inning? That is a pretty good indicator of how well a pitcher did. I like WHIP better than ERA, to be honest. If you see a pitcher floating around 1, they're doing a fantastic job. So I kind of want to throw that in there real quick before we move on. Alright, here's an interesting fact. You can pitch a no-hitter and still get the loss. You could theoretically walk a batter in the top of the 9th. He's still second. The guy hits a sacrifice bunt to move him to third. The next guy hits a sacrifice fly to knock him home for the score, and then the next guy gets out. You did not give up a single hit. You pitched all 9 innings, but you still got the loss. Here's another random G-Whiz fact while I'm thinking about it. In a standard 9-inning game, what is the most strikeouts a pitcher can get in a game? There are 3 outs per inning, if you didn't know that. So let's do the math. 9 innings, 3 outs per inning. So if you struck out 3 per inning, that would be 27. So 27 is right? 27 is the max? Nope. Technically, if a batter swings for a 3rd strike and the ball hits the dirt, they can run to first and try to get there before the catcher recovers the ball and throws to first. So technically, the true answer is unlimited. Will there be more than 27 strikeouts in a game? Doubtful. But technically, it's unlimited as far as the opportunity. The record is 20 in a game, which has been done 4 times. Once by Kerry Woods, once by Max Scherzer, and twice by Roger Clemens. I want to say these are not all the stats. After all, we did not touch on base running stats or fielding stats. And again, these are what are considered quote-unquote standard stats. I would like to say in future episodes I will touch on fielding and base running stats because I think they are very underappreciated. But like I've said in the past, I kind of like keeping the podcast around 30-ish minutes because I feel like it's a perfect length for a drive to work and home. And I, for one, also listen to podcasts, and I really enjoy 30-minute podcasts. So I'm trying not to keep this too long, but we will touch into those stats. There's a whole new world of advanced stats that we will slowly delve into in the future. I also plan on doing a deep dive on defense at some point because, man, defense is so overlooked by many of my colleagues, other fans of the game I know, and even some professionals out there that talk about the sport. I wanted to touch on the stats because without the basics of standard stats, it would make it much more difficult to understand why more advanced stats are so important. That being said, I know this was not Braves specific this week, but I do believe this week was essential. I hope that even a seasoned baseball fan got some nice little tidbits from this episode. I do have a listener question/topic this past week that is Braves specific. Brian H. asked me to touch on the history of the Braves franchise. He is semi-new to the sport and wanted a background on the franchise. Well, the Braves actually have not been in Atlanta forever. They have only been there since 1966. They have been at the Atlanta Fulton County Stadium from 66 to 96. Then they moved to Turner Field and were there from 97 to 2016. Interestingly, you could see part of the old Fulton County Stadium from the Turner Field parking lot. I remember that from when I was a kid. Well, I say kid, it wasn't that long ago. They have been at SunTrust, now Truist Park, ever since. If anyone has not been yet, I was skeptical of the move since Turner was so new, but man, is the new stadium amazing. The whole atmosphere is better, from restaurants surrounding it to parking to the hotels, to stuff inside the park. Everything is great. I love the new stadium. The Braves technically started in Boston in 1871, but were not named the Braves until 1912. And then they were the Braves until 1912 until 1935, with a short hiatus of that name, and went back to being the Braves in 1941. They had names such as Red Stockings, Red Caps, Bean Eaters, Doves, Rustlers, Bees while in Boston. The Braves then moved to Milwaukee in 1953 and stayed there till 1965. A small interesting fact is that Hank Aaron played 11 years, consisting of his best seasons in Milwaukee, not Atlanta. So he played 11 years in Milwaukee as a Milwaukee Brave. So if you wanted to be, say something, throw someone off guard in a conversation, you could say, who is the best Atlanta Brave career-wise? Well, technically, even though Hank Aaron is widely considered the best Brave of all time career-wise, if you use that caveat there, he technically only played, he didn't play, there was 11 years where he didn't play in Atlanta. You could definitely remember that for some gotcha questions in the future. Some more interesting player situations is that Hall of Famer Eddie Matthews only had one season in an Atlanta uniform. Another interesting fact is that Babe Ruth actually played his last 28 games as a Brave for Boston Braves in 1935. So, you could also say, who's the best player to ever put on a Braves uniform? I would say technically Babe Ruth, even though he only played 28 games, so he didn't have the best career as a Brave, but, he's freaking Babe Ruth, and he was on the Braves for 28 games. Alright everyone, that is this week's show. Thanks so much for listening. Please do me a solid and rate 5 stars on Apple and all your other podcast platforms. I've found this is the easiest way for people to find the show, Apple especially. Also, subscribe and share on all your other favorite platforms, including Apple, iHeart, Google, Spotify, and more. Email bravesdugout@gmail.com if you want to email us, Twitter @BravesDugoutPod. Check out the Facebook group Braves Dugout, where this podcast spawned from, or the website bravesdugoutpod.wixsite.com/bravesdugoutpod. You guys rock. Chop on and go Braves.